Hi everyone, it's Samara. Welcome or welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. As you can tell by the title of today's video, I am going to be talking about Wuthering Heights 2026, directed by Emerald Fennell, the new Wuthering Heights movie. I'm going to be talking about what I found interesting, and I say interesting very loosely. To preface, my credentials are, as I said in one of my previous videos, I wanted to read Wuthering Heights before I watched the film. And I indeed did that. I went and bought Wuthering Heights and I read the whole thing prior to watching the film. Not that I needed to, and we'll get onto that later. And I also saw the film. I saw the film on opening day in the UK. I didn't pay for the ticket, and thank goodness I didn't pay for the ticket. But yeah, I saw the film opening day in the UK, and those are my credentials, and that's why I'm going to talk about it. Not that you want my thoughts and feelings, but I hope it will open a discussion into what other people thought of it. So yeah, that's what we're going to do. Spoiler warning, I will be talking about the original Wuthering Heights book by Emily Bronte, as well as the 2026 film adaptation in relative depth, talking about characters, character arcs, plot points, etc. So do not watch this if you haven't seen it, when you want to see it, or you think this is going to be spoiled for you, because it most likely will be. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to start with is press for the film. I'm sure we've all seen the video of Emerald Fennell essentially exposing that she's never read the book. The biggest issue with the film is that Heathcliff is not a person of colour. He's played by Jacob Elordi in this film, but that is essentially the crux of the book and a huge plot point and storyline mover, etc, etc. So I think firstly, to make Heathcliff not a person of colour is ridiculous. So Emerald Fennell was asked by The Hollywood Reporter why Heathcliff isn't a person of colour, and her response was, I think the thing is everyone who loves this book has such a personal connection to it, and so you can only ever kind of make the movie that you sort of imagined yourself when you read it. That's the short of what she said. This to me kind of screams that she never really read Wuthering Heights, or if she did, then she didn't really get it. I think it's very explicit in the book that Heathcliff is a person of colour, and so removing the racial aspects from this film is so dumb, because it is extremely crucial to the story. We have to remember that the book is set in the late 1700s, across a span of 30 or so years, and was first published in 1847. So race is very prevalent in this time, and to remove that just removes a whole story. And yeah, going off of that, Heathcliff's race underpins a lot of his story arc and a lot of his relationship with Catherine, which is what Fennell focused on in the film. And so this would have created a whole new aspect to what was going on and whatnot. And again, when prompted on this, Fennell said that she was focusing on the sadomasochistic elements of the book. Now, like I said, I have recently read the book, very recently, and I was not getting sadomasochism from it. Please feel free to tell me in the comments if you were, but it's very clear that Heathcliff and Catherine have a very tumultuous relationship. They're very verbally and emotionally abusive and manipulative towards each other, but it's more about the turbulence of emotions and the emotional strain they put on each other as opposed to physical intimacy. We also need to put some of the blame of the casting on Jacob Elordi himself, because it's your duty as an artist or an actor, in my personal opinion, to do research on your character. And this also shows to me that Jacob Elordi has never taken interest in Wuthering Heights, doesn't know Wuthering Heights. And this can be said for the rest of the cast as well. Obviously, they don't have a say in who is cast, which is why I think focus should be on Jacob Elordi. But you know, like I said, he could have done some research, he could have done any research, and he would know that Heathcliff is famously a person of colour. Another thing I found quite interesting is that the title of the film is Wuthering Heights, but with quotations around it. And Fandango actually asked Fennell about this, and her response was, you can't adapt a book as dense and complicated and difficult as this book. I can't say I'm making Wuthering Heights, so don't make it. If you think, as the great director that you believed yourself to be, that you can't adapt it, don't do it. If you think you're going to ruin it, if you think you're going to tarnish it, if you think you're going to have to make so many changes that it won't live up to the amazing book you say it is, don't do it. When you enjoy something so much, sometimes you don't want it to be touched, and that's okay. Not everything has to be adapted and not everything has to be changed or fit to, you know, a modern audience. They're classics for a reason. And if you don't think you can do it, then don't attempt it. Because there's plenty of other directors that probably would like to attempt it, but now you've put your name all over it. And so it's just going to be a copy of that. There's so many young people that are going to be watching Wuthering Heights. And I actually went to see the film with a friend who had never seen Wuthering Heights before. Well, never heard of Wuthering Heights before, sorry. And this is her impression of it. This is what she thinks Wuthering Heights is when it's not. Okay, now we're going to be moving on to the original book by Emily Bronte, first published in 1847, actually under a pseudonym, which was quite interesting to find out when I was doing my research for this. Most prevalently, in this book, Bronte explores love and passion and perseverance, persistence even, grief, loss, race, class, all through this romantic and also gothic genre lens, and it's so incredibly interesting to read and picture in your mind. It also explores taboo subjects like domestic violence and cruelty, which not a lot of romance sort of novels were doing at the time. You know, they weren't looking at how tumultuous and exhausting a relationship can be. What I found most interesting actually is that, unlike most books, it's not written from the single perspective of a protagonist or an antagonist. It's written from two perspectives, but mostly from one. It's written from the perspectives of Mr. Lockwood and Nellie. They're very prevalent characters in this book, but they're telling the stories of other people. I'm going to read you a short synopsis of the book so you have an understanding of this in comparison to the film, which I'll talk about later. Mr. Earnshaw brings an orphan boy, Heathcliff, to Wuthering Heights and receives two very different receptions from his two children. His daughter, Catherine, is very kind and playful with Heathcliff, while his son, Hindley, becomes very abusive after the death of Mr. Earnshaw. Catherine subsequently falls in love with Heathcliff, but feels as though she cannot marry him due to race and social status. She therefore marries the Lintons' son, Edgar, to secure a higher social status. Distraught and feeling betrayed, Heathcliff disappears and Catherine mourns this loss of the person closest to her. Time passes and Heathcliff returns to Wuthering Heights, educated and wealthy, and systematically destroys Hindley Earnshaw and the Lintons. He ends up buying Wuthering Heights and marrying Isabella Linton, Edgar's younger sister, to purposefully abuse her as retaliation for Edgar's relationship with Catherine. Later, Catherine dies during the birth of her daughter, Cathy. Heathcliff is torn apart and pushes his madness onto his son, Linton, forcing a marriage between him and Cathy to seize the Lintons' property. Driven completely mad, Heathcliff begins to starve himself and eventually dies. This line of abuse ends with the children. So yeah, as you can tell, the book is about loss and grief and how you understand love and what love means to other people and how it's different for everyone. It also talks about abuse. Like I said, it's about an abusive story, not just from the abusers, but how the abusers are also abused, I think is incredibly interesting. It shows that this is a cycle, this is a chain, and unless we break it, it's not going to stop. Yes, there is an epic love to it, but that's not all the storyline holds. And we see this for the fact that the book doesn't end when Catherine dies. And I think that's what makes it so interesting. Why doesn't it end when Catherine dies if it's supposed to be about this epic love? It shows that love carries on even when someone has passed. One of my favourite storylines actually in the book that has nothing to do with Catherine and Heathcliff is that of Isabella, who is Edgar Linton's younger sister. In the book, she marries Heathcliff and she believes that she can change him. She ends up being a survivor of domestic abuse and flees him and breaks from this. It shows strength and it shows perseverance, and you know, she wanted him to be a good person, a better person, and she realised that wasn't going to happen. So I guess we should start talking about the film. What I'm going to be talking about is primarily what I felt was incorrect. And when I say incorrect, I mean obviously it doesn't match the original storyline. I do understand that this is an adaptation, but as Fennell said herself, you can't adapt a book as dense as this. Okay, starting with the characters, or should I say lack thereof, because Fennell removes quite a few of the prominent characters from the book. I'm going to read who they are and where and like how they've been removed, essentially. Okay, so starting with Hindley Earnshaw, Catherine's older brother, and subsequently his wife Frances and their son Hareton. Hindley is immediately removed from the book in the first scene. Catherine says we can call Heathcliff Heathcliff after her dead brother. Firstly, no, Heathcliff was not the name of her brother. Secondly, Fennell's already killed him off. So that means him, his wife, and his son are non-existent in this film. And we'll get onto this later, but because of where the story ends, Linton Heathcliff and Isabella's son, is also not in the film. Then we move on to Mr. Lockwood, who is the narrator of the first 4 chapters of the book. He's just not there. Don't know why, he's just not. And also Mrs. Earnshaw, Catherine's mother. Again, she's not there in the film. It is just Catherine and her father who then take in Heathcliff. Another interesting thing is that Mr. and Mrs. Linton aren't there. These are the parents of Edgar and Isabella. And also in this film, Isabella is Edgar's ward, so they're not actually brother and sister. He has just taken her in. So yeah, there's also that aspect. That familial aspect has just completely disappeared. Mr. Kenneth, the doctor, who pops in and out in the book from time to time, he's not particularly relevant, but he's relevant enough to mention, if that makes sense. And Mr. Green, who becomes the lawyer for both families. So yeah, because these characters are missing, obviously a drastic amount of the storyline that should have been in the film, which was in the book, is also missing. However, I do agree that these characters weren't needed for Fennell's adaptation and what she did with the storyline, so I don't understand why they were taken out. Okay, another thing before I dive completely into the differences between the book and the film, it should be noted that the book is split into 2 volumes, and the film covers volume 1 and about 10-15 pages maximum of volume 2. Again, this is why some of the characters are missing. People like Hareton, Linton, Cathy, these are all, and Mr. Green even, these are all missing from the film purely because when the film ended, they had not yet been introduced in the book, if that makes sense. So yeah. Okay, I'm going to be reading these like on and off from my notes, so I'm going to look down at the screen just to, see what I'm getting at. Okay, so what I'm going to do first is I'm going to say what happened. I've kind of taken key plot points from the film, and I'm going to say what happens in that key plot point and how it is different to the book. Okay, so we start the film with a public hanging, and at this public hanging, Mr. Earnshaw sees young Heathcliff with a very abusive man and decides to take him off him and brings him back to Wuthering Heights. He then brings him home and they are greeted by Catherine and Nellie. Nellie is the companion of Catherine and, lifelong friend at this point. At this point, they're still children. Catherine immediately becomes attached to Heathcliff and sort of, disregards Nellie, and this creates resent, which is prominent for later on in the film. Okay, so immediately when we start, Mrs. Earnshaw and Hindley aren't there. Obviously, like I said, they have been removed from the film. This means that the later sort of abuse endured by Heathcliff still comes from Mr. Earnshaw as opposed to from Hindley. So subsequently, Catherine and Heathcliff grow older and they grow a lot closer as they grow older, and Heathcliff protects Catherine from the abuse of her father. Her father is a drunk and he gets very emotional, let's say, and Heathcliff stands up to him for the sake of Catherine and takes the brunt of the abuse, essentially. Eventually, as they grow older, Edgar Linton and his ward Isabella move into a neighbouring house, Thrushcross Grange, and Catherine becomes absolutely fixated by the pair and their way of living and the things that they have. So on one day, Catherine decides to go down to Thrushcross Grange and see what they're doing, and she gets invited to stay. She writes a letter back to Wuthering Heights saying that she has hurt her ankle and she'll be staying with the Lintons for the foreseeable until she is well enough to come back to Wuthering Heights. Bear in mind, the distance is not that great, so she definitely could have come back, even with a hurt ankle, especially because she was being brought by horse and carriage. So yeah, bit weird, whatever. And she subsequently comes back, I believe 6 weeks later. After this time and personal time spent together, Edgar develops feelings for Catherine and asks her to marry him, to which she subsequently says yes. She then has a huge conversation with Nellie about it, and Heathcliff is listening in, to which Nellie is aware, however Catherine is not. And Catherine talks about how she can't marry Heathcliff because of the way that he is and the fact that he's poor and uneducated. And so she explains that she's said yes to Edgar and that she's going to be marrying him. From this, Heathcliff is very distraught and leaves Wuthering Heights. Stopping here, for the most part, this is actually very accurate to the book. This is very similar to what happens. You know, she hurts herself, she stays there, and subsequently comes back and then has a marriage proposal from Edgar Linton. Heathcliff is distraught and goes away. And the only difference is it's not so much the fact that he's poor and uneducated that is the reason that she can't marry him, it's that he's a person of colour. Again, this is not relevant to the film because Heathcliff is being played by Jacob Elordi, but that is where the main difference is. But all in all, this is pretty accurate, and I was actually impressed because some of the language used was almost verbatim from the book, and I found that throughout the film that some of the language used was almost verbatim, which made me want to like it more, but it was just like the storyline in general was just inhibiting me from enjoying it. So years go by, Catherine and Nellie are now living at Thrushcross Grange with Edgar and Isabella, living this lavish lifestyle, and get word that Heathcliff has returned to Wuthering Heights. He has come back very wealthy and very educated and has bought Wuthering Heights from Mr. Earnshaw and is now the lead tenant, and Mr. Earnshaw is basically living under his roof instead. Again, this is basically accurate except for the fact that he buys Wuthering Heights from Mr. Earnshaw. In the book, he buys it from Hindley because Hindley Earnshaw, Catherine's brother, is the owner of Wuthering Heights, but obviously he doesn't exist in the film. Now, this is where things get annoying for me. So in the film, after note of Heathcliff's return, Catherine invites him to dinner, and at this point, the next 45 minutes is basically a montage of them having an affair. It's long scenes, it's short scenes, it's literally a montage section with music over it of them having an affair. This does not happen in the book. They never have an affair. Could it be argued that there is an emotional affair? Absolutely. We know that each other is the greatest love of the other's life. And so, yes, an emotional affair is definitely being had. But a physical one? No. What Catherine doesn't tell Heathcliff before this affair begins is that she's actually pregnant with Edgar's child. And when he finds out, in retaliation, he starts making moves, essentially, on Isabella and subsequently marries her. Isabella is very, very happy by this. She adores Heathcliff and thinks he's incredibly interesting. But he goes on to abuse her. And this was my biggest gripe with the film. This is accurate in the book. He does marry Isabella in retaliation and he does abuse her. But in the film, Isabella is degraded beyond belief. There is a scene in the film in which Nellie goes to check on Isabella in Wuthering Heights, and she is chained up to the fireplace with a collar around her, and she's on her knees, and she has her hands up like little paws, and she's essentially panting like a dog. And when Nellie tries to talk to her and ask her to come home to Thrushcross Grange, Heathcliff turns and talks to her, and talks to her like you would a dog, telling her to stay, telling her to sit, telling her good girl. And this completely degrades Isabella's character. Isabella is the strongest woman in the book. She doesn't take no for an answer, and to make her a pet completely undermines how important this character is and how important it was for the times, and for all of this to be thrown away in the sake of sadomasochism and BDSM, I think is absolutely disgusting, and Fennell should be extremely ashamed of what she's done with Isabella's character. We're now at the end of the film, which is nowhere near the end of the book. Coming to the end of the film, Catherine becomes very ill. Nellie believes that she's just overreacting, and she subsequently dies of insepticemia, and during this time she also loses the baby, and so Edgar has now lost his soon-to-be child and also his wife. Both Edgar and Heathcliff are absolutely distraught by this, and Heathcliff consoles Catherine's dead body, essentially, and that is where we end the film. Again, this is kind of true. Yes, Catherine does die, but she actually gives birth to her child. She doesn't lose the child because she's dying of insepticemia, and Cathy grows up, and we see that throughout the book. But there's so much left of Volume 2 that we don't see. We don't hear about Linton's return to Wuthering Heights. We don't see the arguments and the bonds, I guess, both negative and positive, between the Lintons and the Heathcliffs. And I think that's depriving us of what the story is in its whole sense. Yes, it's an epic love, but love doesn't come in one way and isn't about one other person. Love comes in many ways, and you can love many people to different extents. We love differently, we love people differently, and that is what is shown throughout the book. Love is grief, is loss, is happiness, is sadness. They're all one and the same. And to focus on physical intimacy and BDSM, I think just completely undermines what the book is actually trying to say. Okay, now I guess we're moving on to conclusions. Okay, like I said, I did go and see the film with a friend who had never read Wuthering Heights, and so she didn't really know what to expect when going into it, and yet somehow she still didn't understand what was going on, and I think that is a testament to Emerald Fennell's directing. You're telling a story, right? And I understand that in this instance we're adapting a story. A majority of this audience will be going in uneducated on the storyline. They might have heard of it, but they don't know what it's about. It's most likely that these people have never read Wuthering Heights, and I've seen a stark amount of people that are going and are actively gloating about how they've never read Wuthering Heights, which is jarring to me. I think it's your duty as a director to tell a story, regardless of if it's an adaptation or if it's off the cuff, and like most films are. And the fact that you can't successfully tell a story is a testament to your directing and your directing capabilities. Obviously, I'm not going to knock the film completely. I think the visuals, the set and the costume were visually very, very stunning. That is what Fennell is known for. I couldn't take my eyes off the screen in a great way, but that was only because of what was around. It was very visually pleasing, but that's where everything kind of ended for me. A big issue of mine was that the costume wasn't historically accurate, and I understand that it is an adaptation, and you know, directors have their own free will to change things how they want, but I think because there's no actual mention of when and where the film is set, it would have provided great context for those like my friend who are going in with no knowledge. Fabrics like latex and cellophane were used with a sort of 1950s bridal fashion inspired look sort of added into especially Catherine's outfits. Catherine's and Isabella's, I would say. These fabrics weren't about, these styles weren't about during this time, and so immediately it's not period accurate, which doesn't help people who are being provided no context or going in with no context. I also think that the only thing that really provided location, I mean, especially for myself, was that it was in the moors of Yorkshire. I obviously do know where it's set, but you can tell visually by location where it is. But again, a lot of people that might be watching it from outside of the UK might not immediately get where this is. But unfortunately, everything else, even the architecture of Wuthering Heights, just had a very like late 19th century or even 20th century feel to it, which obviously we're dealing with the late 18th and very, very early 19th century. Again, this was context that could have been added. I understand that, like I said, it was visually pleasing. It was enjoyable to look at. But if you're not going to provide context anywhere else, you have to provide context through things like costume and language and set design. Okay, and finally, the acting. Now, I'm going to basically be reading this off of my laptop because I spoke about a few of the characters sort of in depth. So the obvious being Jacob Elordi, obviously as Heathcliff. He's white. Like I mentioned before, he's white. This is incorrect. However, I don't think his portrayal of Heathcliff was terrible, to be honest. I think the writing and the direction is kind of what made it feel worse than it is. I mean, as we've seen in, Elordi's previous projects, he does have emotional range. So I think to say that he didn't in this film would be wrong. However, I don't think Heathcliff was written to have emotional range. Again, Fennell said that she adapted this from how she read it, and I don't think that she understands that someone who is angry and possessive and abusive and someone who is loving and caring and kind can be mutually exclusive. And so I think she just wrote Heathcliff as a bad person, and that's what I think made his performance worse, not to say that he acted poorly. His Yorkshire accent wasn't terrible. I'm not going to say it was great. I could hear bits of the Aussie accent slipping through, but it wasn't as bad as other people that have attempted more regional British accents. I think it's a lot easier to do received pronunciation. Yeah, I do applaud his Yorkshire accent, but yeah, they were slightly noticeable to me. I'm also just a bit of a language and accent nerd, so yeah. Okay, next, moving on to Margot Robbie, and this is no shade to Margot, but she is too old to be playing Catherine. So in the book, Catherine is a teenager throughout. She actually turned 18 just before passing away, sorry. Unfortunately, I don't think that Margot Robbie can get away with playing a teenager anymore. I think, obviously, we know that Jacob Elordi can and has been, but yeah, I just don't think that Margot was the right casting for it. I think the reason that she didn't do a Yorkshire accent is because she can't do one, and so she ended up doing received pronunciation instead, which obviously there would have been stronger and weaker Yorkshire accents, but we have to appreciate that Catherine has lived in the north her whole life, so she would have had even a twinge of one, even if she was, of a higher class to working class Yorkshire people who would have had thicker accents at the time. But I mean, personally, I did think her performance was kind of one note. It lacked emotional diversity, and her portrayal felt a lot more antagonistic for Catherine. She felt far more mean than she did in the book. I think in the book, and again, this is probably down to writing and directing, but in the book, she at least feels like she has complexity to her personality. Here, it was kind of like my way or the highway. Okay, now moving on to Alison Oliver, who I think had the best acting in the whole film, and I mean that, even though I did speak about earlier how they ruined Isabella's storyline, making her a bit more submissive. I still think that doesn't take away from the fact that Alison did an amazing job in portraying that. Her acting was absolutely incredible. She was genuinely just a joy to watch. I think if you watch the film, you'll know that Isabella is a bit of a enigma as a character. You either love her, you hate her. I just really enjoyed her portrayal of Isabella and the eccentricities, and I think that was one of the reasons I rated it 1.5 stars on Letterboxd. I would say probably a half for visuals and 1 star for Alison herself, because yeah, I just thought it was a great portrayal of Isabella. Okay, now moving on to Hong Chow, who played Nellie, and I enjoyed her acting and her representation of Nellie and Nellie's emotions. Again, it wasn't as one note as Margot's was. There was definitely complexity there, and you can see the resentment. You feel the resentment that Nellie has, and it doesn't need to be explicit. her body language, her facial expressions, her tone, all express this feeling of resentment, and I think that that's something that some of the other actors lacked in this film. Finally, I'm going to talk about Owen Cooper, who played young Heathcliff. I think Owen's performance was really great, and I think his understanding of the character was very good as well. It was very in-depth. He knew who Fennell wanted Heathcliff to be, if that makes sense, and he hit that like very well, and I think Jacob did the same. My only worry is because Heathcliff was written quite one note and just kind of aggressive, it kind of mirrors his character in adolescence, and I don't want him to be stuck with angry young boy. Do you know what I mean? Because he definitely has the range to be able to play other roles. He could play a love interest, he could play the comedic best friend. I don't want him to just be pigeonholed into I am aggressive and emotionally unavailable young boy. To be honest, I think I agree with the theories that Fennell created this film as a self-insert fanfic. I mean, we know that she's worked with Elodie in the past on Saltburn, and they have spoken about openly about having a very close sort of director-actor relationship. But I do think she's a little in love with him, to be honest. I think she's a little obsessed with him. And that's also why she cast Margot Robbie, because it's who can I get that looks similar to me to play across someone that I'm in love with or have a crush on, and I've got to make note of it, so I've got to use a big name, something that people are going to know. Oh, I know, I'll use Wuthering Heights. And that's what I think the film is at the end of the day. It strips back the emotional complexities and just replaces it with physical intimacy. And that's not what should be done. That's not what Wuthering Heights is about. It's about showing the emotional complexities and how one person can be diverse in the way that they think and feel and change the way that they think and feel. And that was not even presented with her adaptation. It was everyone is one way for the rest of their lives, and here is a load of unwarranted BDSM. That's what I got from it. I'm going to be so for real, I don't have any intention of ever watching this film again, but it's not calling me to come back and watch it anytime soon, which is a shame because it could have been really great, and yet it just wasn't. With all this being said, however, stream the Wuthering Heights soundtrack by Charlie XCX, which I thought was absolutely incredible. So my favourite songs while filming this currently are Chains of Love and Eyes of the World featuring Sky Ferreira. So you should definitely stream that album, specifically those two tracks. And most importantly, I wouldn't be talking about this if I didn't want you to read the book. Read the book. Genuinely, it will change your perspective on the film if you have seen it and you haven't read the book. And it will also give you a deeper understanding as to why I am making this video. And again, I'm not going to sit here and completely bash the film. We all need to understand that this is a film adaptation. And when an adaptation's ever 100% accurate, it's an adaptation for a reason. It's not a carbon copy, and that is very clear. Directors have their own styles and thoughts and feelings, and even not to defend Emerald Fennell, but you can only take what you understood from it. That is what an adaptation is at its core at the end of the day, taking what that person understood from it and seeing it through their eyes. And so, yeah, it's never going to be perfect, but I do think there's a lot of things that could have been done better with this film, unfortunately. But yeah, those are my thoughts on Emerald Fennell's Wuthering Heights. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. And comment your thoughts on the film and any other content you would like to see from me in the future. You can also find all of my socials linked in the description if you want to follow me on there. But other than that, read Wuthering Heights, and I'll see you in the next one.